Hello, welcome to my channel Vadi's Tech Space. I am Vadi, and in today's video I'll show you how to access Azure API Management hosted APIs privately without exposing it to the internet. Let's get started. Let me set the stage here by discussing a scenario before we go to the portal. So imagine a scenario where we have people from users from on-premise accessing the web app or the web server over a public IP or a public fully qualified domain name. Now, the web app internally accesses API management using the public fully qualified domain name, and also there are web apps on the web server hosted in Azure which accesses the APIs hosted in the API management via public FQDN. And the API management here talks to the API server over a public IP of the API server. And API server internally talks to the Azure SQL where the database is hosted. Now, this is the scenario. First, so if you see this, accessing the APIs through public FQDN, comes with a significant security risk, as you know. Exposing APIs to the public increases the attack surface here to begin with, creating more potential entry points for the attackers. Look at the potential entry point for the attacker. See, the web app is public, the web server is public, API management is public, and the API server is public again here, and so is the Azure SQL. So now these are so many potential entry points for the attackers here. So this is obviously not a good design. So unauthorized access is a major concern where publicly accessible APIs can be scanned by malicious users looking for vulnerabilities to exploit, potentially allowing them to access some sensitive data. So and also, if you have public IPs, then you become the target of DDoS attacks. This situation invests us, this architecture in requires us to invest more in security monitoring and incident response to stay vigilant against the potential threats. So now let's reimagine this, right? Let's reimagine this with the private architecture here. Now, the same actors are here who are on premises who wants to access the Azure resources. Now, what have we done here? Okay, so we have a virtual network. Within the virtual network, we have injected the API management in the virtual network. So now it is accessed via privately. So, and then API management again talks to the API server privately over a private IP. So the public IP is removed from the API server. And we have added Azure private endpoints and web app private endpoints so that the people from on-premise via virtual application gateway can access everything over privately. Now, if you see this architecture, you can add a Azure firewall here as well to scan the incoming traffic. So now this private architecture has less entry points and it reduces the attack surface significantly, limiting the access to the trusted users and services. So the benefit from secure data transmission is like keeping all the sensitive data within the controlled network here. Okay, so this way we can maintain confidentiality of our information. Now, here, our scope of this video is how to bring this API management within the virtual network. And in this example, we will also see how API management can access the IPs hosted on the API servers privately, and we will also install a private Azure DNS and add the and configure it so that using the private fully qualified domain name, I can access the APIs privately. Okay, let's go to the Azure portal now and start making the changes. I am in the Azure portal. In the portal, I already have few resources. So one is the API management, which I have. Okay, it's a developer tab, and this is public. Okay, and I have a API already added here. So this employee service API is uh, hosted in a VM. This is the public IP address of the VM, and this is my configuration. So the VM here is that I have a API test VM here where the APIs are hosted. Now this is the IP 20.5.197, 20.5.197.189. So this is the API which I have added. So let's quickly test this. Okay, there is a operation here wherein I have a method called employee, which is get. So I'm going to say employee service slash employee, which is working fine. You know, I get one record back. So I can also test the VM here just to make sure I get the same result. So it's HTTP slash API slash employee. So now if I do this, I get the same result here. Okay, and this is what is configured here. Okay, so of course this gets appended. Now let's go to the network here in the API management, and if you see the virtual network is none. Okay, so now what we are going to do is that we are going to get it here. We are going to make it internal by injecting or deploying this API management into the virtual network. Now, before we go ahead and select few things here, what I'm going to do is that I will go to the virtual network. I have a virtual network where I have this VM. So I'm going to deploy the API in the same network where I have the virtual machine. Now, Australia East, and this is my address space. Subnets, I have a couple of subnets. So a requirement is that we need a dedicated subnet which we can delegate it to API management. So I'm going to say SNet API APIM internal. Okay. So I'm going to leave this as is and I'm going to click on add also. Okay. So here I have created the subnet. Now, apart from creating the subnet, there is also a requirement that you add a NSG and assign it to the subnet. So let's go ahead and create a network service group here. So we should also add few rules, inbound and outbound rules, which is required for the API management. So I'm going to say NSG, network service group. I'm going to say create. I'm going to go pick a resource group. I'm going to say NSG APIM internal. Okay. Australia East is fine. Review and create. Let's wait for this to get created. The NSG is created here. So I go to the NSG in the inbound rules. I'm going to click on add and I have to enable 80 and 43 here. So I'm going to give it any, but in your actual implementation, you have to restrict between internet and virtual network, or custom Azure load balancer to virtual network. So for this demo, I'm going to keep it as any to any, and I'm going to give 80 comma 443. Okay, this um, okay. All right, I'm going to add it here. So I have allowed 80 and 443 here. Okay. So now I'm also going to, there's a management port which is required. So I'm going to say from the, if I go to the service tag here, right, API management, and I go to the virtual network, service tag, virtual network, I can enable the 3443 port which is used here. Okay, it's on the TCP/IP. Now, like this, for 80 and 40 port 43 also you can select the service tags and you can allow the traffic between the API management and the virtual network and the internet as well. So now here I have added this. Now I also need few outbound rules here. So in the outbound rules, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add the same 443s and a 443 port basically. All right. And one, let me go ahead and add the 443. Any, I'm going to leave this as any, and I'm going to say HTTPS. And I'm going to click on add. So basically, from the, it needs storage, access to the storage. So, you know, typically you would say an outbound, I need an outbound from the service tag virtual network to a service tag storage. Okay, so that is something you can do, and also you need it for the keyword as well. So that is why, instead of adding multiple things and to save time, I'm clicking any here, and of course I would not recommend any in the actual implementation. Okay. All right, if you have Azure Monitor, then there is another port 1886 that needs to be enabled as well if you add logs and all. So now with this, right, let's go ahead and see, uh, now that this NSG is ready, and this I'm going to add it to the subnet APIM internal. So I'm going to go to the network security group, and I'm saying NSG APIM internal. So I'm going to click on save here. Let me save this. Now, okay, this is done. So in the virtual network, I went ahead and I created a dedicated subnet, which I'll delegate to the API. And I created a NSG, network security group. And in the network security group, I have allowed 8443 and 3443 for API management and the inbound, and in the outbound I have added 443. Hopefully this should work. If anything is needed, we will come back and add it. Now let's see, let's go for the public IP. We need a public IP also. Now I have, let's see which of this is associated to anything. No, so this is not associated. I have a internal 01 and it is not associated to any resource, and it is in Australia. So I'm going to use this by configuring the network. Now let's go to the virtual network and configure it. Let's click on the please select VNet here. Okay. From the none, I clicked on internal, and in the internal, I'm going to click on please select VNet. In the virtual network, I'm selecting the Australia East network. In the subnet, I am going with the SNet APIM internal, which I have created just now. And in the management public IP address, I'm going to give the APIM internal, which I showed you. Okay, APIM internal public IP address. All right. So you can skip this as well. It's not mandatory, but I've kept that. So I will click on apply now. This will take a while, so I'm going to pause this video and come back. Now the APIM is deployed in the network, virtual network, as you see. Now you should be getting a private IP address as well. So here, so you have the private IP, and I have given this public for management portal. So 10.0.1.4. Now what we will do is that I'm going to go to the APIs, and I have an employee service as we tried some time back. So that was on the public IP address here. So I go to this VM. This is the public IP address. So I'm going to take the private IP address of this. Okay, the VM. I'm going to click on edit. I'll go to the settings if not. I'm going to go to the settings, and I'm going to change the web service base URL here to the private IP of the VM. Okay, the rest remains the same. I'll click on save. Okay, now I am good with this. All right, so if I test here, test the application here. Okay, now what happens when I test this application? Of course, I get a bad request because it is internal, right? This is accessing via internet. Okay, this send goes via internet, so it is not allowed. So as you see here, you have to text console in a VNet. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is that now this is good that it failed, right? You are not able to access it. Now I'm going to go to this API test VM. I click on the public IP here. Okay, I go to the overview, API test VM. I'm going to disassociate this public IP from the VM. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I have another virtual machine here. Okay, which is service test VM. Okay, so in this service test VM, the IP which I have disassociated from the API VM, I'm going to assign it here so that I can connect and test this URL API. Okay, so I'm going to go to this is there. I'm going to click on associate again on the API. So in this case, I'm going to go with the network interface and service test VM. We have removed it from API test VM. We will assign it to the service test VM. Okay. So we have to do this because I'm on a free trial and there is a limit for the number of public IPs which I can create. So I play around by associating and disassociating the public IPs. Now I go to the service test VM. It will take a nearly a minute. Okay, I got that. Okay, so this is associated now. What I'm going to do is that now I'm going to connect to this VM, and uh, in the Postman, I'm going to try this, try the API which I have here. Okay, and let's go from there. I will copy this IP and do a remote desktop connection request. I'm going to give my password. All right, so let me get in. So here, what we will try to do now is that uh, I'm going to uh, go to the APIM here, okay, list employees, and in the settings, I'm going to take this base URL and okay, I'm going to go. I just downloaded the Postman here, so I'm going to say uh, employee. Employee is a method, right? So I'm going to click on access here. So it failed, of course. It's in the same network though. Okay, if you see, let's go to the service. This is in the APIM Australia East and it is in the Aus East network. If you go to the APIM uh, virtual machine and APIM, this is in the Aus East network. And if you go to the network here, it is a same Aus East network. So all are in the same network. Now let's go back here. So of course, I'm going to try this. The private IP, I'll be able to access it. Okay, as you see, I'm accessing the VM directly from this machine. I'm able to access it. So now what I'm going to do is that let's go and before creating the private DNS. So let me try test it out in the VM first. I'm going to say Windows System 32. I'll go here and I'll go to the my host file here. Okay, etc. Oh, sorry, etc. hosts. So I'm going to go to the host file and add some information here. I'm going to say uh, 10.0.1.4 is this private IP. 10.0.1.4 is the gateway, is what I'm putting in my host here. All right. So now I'm going to save this. Okay. So I'm saying that when I type in this, you go to 104, is what I'm saying here. All right. So let's go ahead and try this one more time. See, so you're able to access it. Now, why? I mean, see, it's all everything is going over the intranet now, network. So if I say NS lookup, right? NS lookup, obviously this will not be there. So, but it picks up from the host here. So it picks up from the host. So now what we are going to do is that let me go back here and I'm going to remove this entry. Okay, I'm going to remove this entry and let me go ahead and refresh it. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this. It's getting cached. I'm going to go to the private network. See, if I go to the incognito and when I try, I'm not getting it. So now let's go to the Azure. Let's go ahead and create the private DNS now. Let me go to home, click on private DNS. I'm going to create a private DNS here. So I'm going to choose the API and API. So here what I'm going to do is that I am going to create a DNS, private DNS, and I'm going to give the name as Azure.api.net. I'm going to give like this. I'm going to click on next. I'm going to click next. Okay, next and create. So this gets created. Now what we are going to do is that Once this get created, we will create, we will link the virtual network A, and we will also add a record wherein we would say that this API, when someone reaches this, then move it to 10.0.1.4. Let's wait till this get created. The private DNS got created. I'm going to go to the resource here. I'm going to, under this DNS management, I'm going to click on virtual network links. Here, I'm going to click on add. I'm going to say VNet API link, and I'm going to select my Australia East network here, and I'm going to click on create. So now while this is creating, I go to the record sets, and I'm going to click on add. I'm going to take this name and put it here. So this one under a record, the private IP of the APIM is 1.4. Okay, as you see, it's 10.0.1.4. I'm going to keep it 10.0.1.4 and click on add. So now in this, now what we did, we created a private DNS, and here we added a record set, and we have linked the virtual network to this private DNS. Now with this, once this has happened, right, what happens is that I will go here. Okay. Now there is no entry in the host file. Okay. As you see, there is no entry in the host file. Now earlier, this URL, I was not able to access it. Now, when I click on this, I'm able to access it. So this is how you create a private architecture wherein the APIM is accessed privately. The APIM internally access the backend services privately, making it secure. So the attack surface is significantly reduced in this architecture. If you found this video helpful, feel free to give it a like and consider subscribing. Until next time, take care. Thank you for watching.